Jason, with his stoic demeanor and unshakable loyalty, had always been a force of nature in Port Charles. He was the man who could walk through fire and come out unscathed, the one who'd face down mobsters, mercenaries, and madmen without blinking. But this was different. This wasn't about bullets or betrayal in the usual sense. This was something darker, something that made Britt's skin crawl when she thought about it too long. She'd seen the lab results herself, samples of a toxin, untraceable and lethal, found in the bloodstream of a patient who died under mysterious circumstances. The patient had been a low-level associate of Jason's, someone who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The toxin wasn't just a poison. It was a message, a warning that whoever was behind this had the power to destroy not just one life, but everyone connected to Jason. Britt's hands trembled as she clutched the folder of evidence she'd compiled. Pages of handwritten notes, test results, and grainy security footage, stills that showed shadowy figures moving through the hospital's lower levels. She wasn't supposed to have this. She'd broken every rule, hacked into systems she had no business accessing, and called in favors from people she'd sworn never to speak to again. But it was worth it. If she was right, and she prayed she wasn't, the syndicate wasn't just targeting Jason. They were using him as a conduit, a carrier for something far worse. The toxin wasn't meant to kill him outright. It was designed to spread, to infect everyone he came into contact with. A biological weapon, one that could wipe out half of Port Charles before anyone realized what was happening. She tried to warn him. God, she tried. She cornered him in the parking garage 2 nights ago, her voice low and urgent as she begged him to listen. Jason, you need to leave. Now. You don't understand what's at stake. His piercing blue eyes had studied her, unreadable as always, but he hadn't dismissed her outright. That was something, at least. He'd asked for proof, and she'd promised to get it. But now, with the clock ticking and the evidence in her hands, she wasn't sure he'd believe her even if she showed him everything. Jason was stubborn, loyal to a fault, and the idea of running, of abandoning the people he cared about, was anathema to him. But this wasn't about loyalty. This was about survival. The hospital was quiet now, the graveyard shift leaving the halls eerily empty. Britt's heels clicked against the linoleum as she made her way to the ICU, where she knew Jason would be. He'd been keeping vigil over Sam, who was recovering from a car accident that Britt now suspected wasn't an accident at all. The syndicate had a way of making things look coincidental, but Britt was too smart for that. She'd seen the patterns, the way the accidents and illnesses were piling up around Jason's inner circle. Carly had been complaining of headaches for weeks, Sunny had been unusually fatigued, and now Sam was lying in a hospital bed, her condition stable but precarious. Britt didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She pushed open the door to the ICU, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Jason was there, sitting beside Sam's bed, his broad shoulders hunched as he watched her sleep. The sight of him, so steady and unyielding, made Britt's chest ache. She wanted to hate him for making this so hard, for being the kind of man who'd never walk away from a fight, even when it was the only way to save everyone. But she couldn't. Not really. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Jason, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. He looked up, his expression guarded but not hostile. We need to talk. Now. He didn't move, his eyes narrowing slightly. Britt, I'm not leaving her. This isn't about Sam, she snapped, her frustration bubbling over. Or maybe it is, but it's bigger than that. You're putting everyone in danger just by being here. He stood then, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up a threat. You've got 5 minutes. Tell me what you know. Britt didn't waste a second. She opened the folder, spreading the papers across the small table beside Sam's bed. She pointed to the lab results first. This toxin, it's not natural. It's engineered, Jason. It's designed to spread through contact, through air, through anything. The patient who died last week? He was one of your guys. I ran the tests myself. It's in his blood. And I think it's in yours too. Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Britt kept going, her words tumbling out faster now. The syndicate, whoever they are, they're using you. They want you to stay here to keep doing what you do, because every person you touch, every room you walk into, you're spreading it. You're their weapon, Jason. And if you don't leave, it's not just you who's going to die. It's Sam, Carly, Sonny, your kids, everyone. For a moment he said nothing, his eyes scanning the papers. Britt could see the gears turning in his mind, weighing her words against everything he knew about the world he lived in. She wanted to scream at him to hurry up, to understand that there was no time for his usual methodical approach. But she forced herself to stay calm, to let him process it. "How do you know this?" he asked finally, his voice low and steady. "I don't have all the answers," Britt admitted. "But I've seen enough. The security footage, the missing samples, the way people around you are getting sick. It's not random. Someone's pulling the strings, and they're counting on you staying here, playing the hero." Jason's hand clenched into a fist, the only sign that her words were getting to him. "If I leave, they'll come after me. They'll come after everyone anyway." "Maybe," Britt said, her voice softer now. "But if you stay, it's guaranteed. You're the key, Jason. You're the one they're using to make this happen. If you go, you buy us time. Time to figure out who's behind this. Time to find a way to stop it." He looked back at Sam, his expression unreadable. Britt could see the war raging inside him, the need to protect the people he loved battling against the reality of what she was telling him. She hated this, hated being the one to force him into an impossible choice. But she didn't have a choice either. "Britt," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you're wrong." "I'm not," she cut in, her tone fierce. "I wish I was. But I'm not. And if you don't trust me, trust this." She shoved the folder into his hands, forcing him to take it. "Read it. All of it. Then decide." Her plans were complex, her motivations laced with a mother's intense protectiveness and a scientist's cold practicality. She had devised a plot to involve Lulu's family, the Spencers, in a controversy that may derail their legacy. Liesl's most recent scheme featured fabricated medical records and a web of lies that implicated Lulu's father, Luke Spencer, as the mastermind of a dangerous pharmaceutical conspiracy. The accusations were unfounded, but Liesl's ability to manufacture evidence and manipulate perceptions made the threat appear all too real. For Dante, the stakes were equally great. As a detective, he was tasked with discovering the truth, but his attachment to Lulu and her family hindered his work. Liesl's activities were more than a professional challenge. They were also a personal affront, a reminder of the devastation she had previously caused in their lives. The alliance between Dante and Lulu started as a necessity. They met in secret on the docks, where the chilly breeze from the water bore the weight of their common history. Lulu's determined eyes met Dante's, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to vanish. They didn't have to talk about the past to feel its pull. It was in the way their shoulders brushed as they read documents, in the silent moments when their hands lingered too long over a shared cup of coffee. Their strategy was simple but risky. Gather evidence to expose Liesl's lies before the controversy ruined the Spencers or Dante's career. They divided their efforts, with Dante researching police records and leveraging his contacts, and Lulu using her journalistic instincts to pursue leads that Liesl had not imagined. They were a force together, their complementing skills reigniting a once unstoppable combination. As they worked, the ancient spark started to flicker. It began with simple gestures, a shared laugh at a memory of their early days, Dante's hand steadying Lulu when she fell on a dark street, and Lulu's quiet intensity when she spoke of defending her family. These were quick but powerful encounters, evoking emotions that neither had totally buried. Dante recalled the nights they'd spent fantasizing of a future together, one free of Port Charles's never-ending drama. Lulu recalled how Dante had always been her safe harbor, the only person who saw her strengths and weaknesses without judgment. However, both were wary. Their past was not a fairy tale. It was a battleground full of broken promises and unsaid regrets. Could they regain faith in each other? Not only as allies but as much more? Liesl was not a passive spectator. She felt Dante and Lulu's blossoming closeness and saw it as a danger to her goals. With her usual guile, she began to create dissent by seeding subtle doubts through anonymous tips and altered facts. A falsified letter implied that Dante withheld information from Lulu, reigniting old doubts about his allegiance. Lulu overheard a whispered rumor implying that Dante's probe was a ruse to further his own purpose. Liesl's approaches were precise, intended to exploit the flaws in their fragile trust. However, Dante and Lulu were no longer the naive lovers they once were. They faced the lies head-on, sitting across from each other in a dimly lit safe house, their words raw and honest. Dante apologized to his past mistakes, such as allowing duty to take precedence over love. Lulu shared her fear of getting hurt again, of opening her heart and losing him. At that point, their weakness became their strength, a bridge spanning the gap of their past. Their inquiry progressed, with each clue bringing them closer to unraveling Liesel's web. They discovered a trail of false paperwork connected Liesel to a dubious pharmaceutical company, which she had exploited to frame Luke. Dante's police investigation revealed flaws in the evidence, while Lulu's insistence resulted in a whistleblower who verified Liesel's involvement. The deeper they dug, the more hazardous things grew. Liesel's allies, shadowy people with personal stakes in the conspiracy, began to close in. A late-night ambush at a warehouse left Dante grazed by a bullet, but Lulu's quick thinking saved them both, keeping her hands calm as she dressed his wound. In the aftermath, as the adrenaline subsided, they sat quietly, their breathing coordinated, their hands joined without saying anything. The threat had shown something they couldn't ignore. They were better together than apart. The encounter with Liesel was unavoidable. They cornered her in her own land, a sterile lab where she had planned her plots. Liesel's poise was unwavering, her smile keen as she taunted them. She talked about their past, about how their love blazed brightly before crumbling. "You think you can outwit me?" she mocked, her eyes gleaming with hatred. "You're too busy chasing old flames to see the bigger picture." But Dante and Lulu were prepared. They delivered the evidence, documents, recordings, and the whistleblower's testimony, with each piece serving as a nail in Liesel's coffin. For once, Liesel had no counter, no way out. Her empire of falsehoods began to crumble, and as the authorities drew in, she was left with just her stubbornness. The aftermath left Port Charles buzzing with activity. The Spencers were cleared, and Dante's reputation was unharmed, but the win felt secondary to what had developed between him and Lulu. They stood together on the pier, where their alliance began, with the water reflecting the first light of dawn. Words were unnecessary. Their shared quiet spoke volumes. The sparks that had flickered during their fight with Liesel had turned into a steady blaze that might either warm or burn them again. Lulu's hand met Dante's, her fingers running through his with serene confidence. Dante glanced at her, his eyes heavy with the weight of their past and the hope for something fresh. They didn't talk about forever. Port Charles had taught them better. But in that moment, they opted to move forward together, wherever it might lead. Their journey was not over. Liesel's loss was a win, but peace in Port Charles was short-lived. New threats lurked, new secrets awaited discovery, and the bonds that tied Dante and Lulu to this place were both unbreakable and intricate. Nonetheless, they approached the unknown future with a reinvigorated feeling of collaboration. Their once shattered love was taking on new forms, not a restoration to what had been, but a chance at something stronger, forged in the fire of their shared fight. Whether those ancient sparks would fully ignite remained to be seen, but for the time being, Dante and Lulu were joined, their hearts pounding in sync with the pulse of a never-sleeping town. Dante Falconeri and Brooklyn Courtemain had always been linked by the complex web of Port Charles relationships. Felicia for some advice. However, he doesn't feel right about leaving the situation with Portia Robinson alone. Will he share what he knows, or keep quiet? Meanwhile, Trina Robinson confronts her mother. Portia is interrogated about what she's been keeping from her daughter. Jordan Ashford tells Curtis that she saved the best for last. While Jordan's conversation with Anna Devane was a bit suspicious, she does have Curtis inspect every inch of the place. With her saying that she's saved the best for last, could she already have pinpointed the bugs? It does state that Curtis gets shaken by something, so clearly Jordan has found something. She didn't share that with Anna, though. It seems like there could be some alliance divisions up ahead. Friday, August 15, 2025. Over with Stella Henry, she calls out Tracy Courtemain. Elsewhere, Justine Turner apologizes to Sonny Corinthos. Well, that certainly is a 180. Is that an apology because she's about to press charges? Or an apology because she realizes someone else is sending the expensive gifts? Which storyline are you looking forward to seeing the most on Friday, August 15, 2025? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Keep watching the soap on ABC to find out what happens next. Across town, Jason Morgan stood in the living room of Britt Westbourne's apartment, the space feeling smaller than it should have, the walls closing in as their voices rose. Britt's eyes blazed with a mix of anger and hurt, her words sharp enough to cut through the silence that had settled between them. "You think you can just walk back into my life, Jason, like nothing's changed?" she demanded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, framing a face that was both defiant and vulnerable. Jason, as always, was a study in restraint, his expression unreadable, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his leather jacket. But beneath the calm exterior, he was unraveling. Britt wasn't just anyone. She was the one person who'd seen through his armor, who'd gotten close enough to leave a mark. Their history was a tangled mess of missed chances and bad timing, and now with her standing inches away, accusing him of abandoning her, Jason felt the weight of every choice he'd made. He wanted to explain, to tell her about the years he'd spent running, hiding, protecting the people he loved from threats she couldn't begin to understand. But words had never been his strength, and Britt wasn't in the mood to hear them anyway. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more venom than her shouts. "You left me, Jason. You left me to deal with everything alone." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? That he'd had no choice? That he'd been protecting her by staying away? Britt wasn't buying excuses tonight, and Jason knew it. The confrontation was a long time coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Meanwhile, Michael Corinthos sat in his office at ELQ, the family business that had become both his empire and his cage. The room was pristine, all polished wood and sleek glass, but it felt suffocating, like a trap he'd walked into willingly. His mother, Carly, had warned him about trusting too easily, but Michael had always believed in second chances, in redemption. Now he was paying the price. The documents on his desk were evidence of his mistake. Contracts signed, deals made, all under the influence of someone he'd thought was on his side. Manipulation was an art form in Port Charles, and Michael had been played like a novice. The person pulling the strings wasn't a stranger. It was someone he'd let into his inner circle, someone who'd smiled to his face while orchestrating his downfall behind his back. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over as he realized how deeply he'd been betrayed. The numbers didn't lie, funds redirected, partnerships dissolved, all designed to weaken his position and leave ELQ vulnerable. Michael's first instinct was to fight back, to confront the traitor and reclaim what was his. But he hesitated, knowing that in this town, rash moves led to ruin. He needed a plan, one that would expose the manipulator without destroying everything he'd worked for. As he stared out the window at the glittering skyline of Port Charles, Michael felt a flicker of resolve. He was a Corinthos, after all, and Corinthos men didn't go down without a fight. At the same time, ADA Molly Lansing Davis, known to most as ADA Turner after her marriage, stood in the quiet of her office at the courthouse, her hands trembling as she drafted a letter she never thought she'd have to write. The weight of her title, her responsibility, pressed down on her shoulders, but it was the weight of her conscience that was heavier. She'd made a mistake, a big one, and it had cost someone their freedom, their reputation, maybe more. The case had seemed airtight at the time, evidence stacked neatly, witnesses credible, motive clear. But new information had come to light, a piece of the puzzle she hadn't seen, and now Molly was faced with the reality that she'd been wrong. Terribly wrong. The apology she was crafting wasn't just professional, it was personal. She'd prided herself on being fair, on seeking justice above all else, but this time she'd failed. The words on the page blurred as her eyes filled with tears, not out of self-pity but out of guilt. She thought of the person she'd wronged, the life she'd disrupted, and the ripple effect her mistake had caused. Molly had always believed in the system, in the law, but now she saw its flaws, its fragility. She couldn't undo the past, but she could take responsibility. The letter was her first step, a formal apology, a public acknowledgement of her error, and a promise to make things right. As she signed her name at the bottom, Molly felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Admitting fault in Port Charles was dangerous. It made you vulnerable, a target. But she couldn't live with the alternative. She sealed the envelope, her resolve hardening. Whatever came next, she'd face it head-on. Drew, still in the alley, wiped the blood from his lip and straightened up. The pain was grounding, a reminder that he was still here, still fighting. He didn't know who to trust anymore, but he knew he couldn't stay still. Port Charles was a chessboard, and he'd just been knocked off a square. The question was who had made the move and why. He thought of the people in his orbit, friends, family, enemies masquerading as both. The punch hadn't just been an attack. It was a message, one he needed to decode before the next blow came. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling through contacts, wondering who he could call, who wouldn't turn on him the moment his back was turned. The list was shorter than he'd like. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, but he wasn't out of the game yet. Drew Kane was many things: soldier, survivor, strategist, and he'd be damned if he let one punch take him down. Back at Britt's apartment, the air between her and Jason was electric, charged with years of unspoken truths. She wasn't yelling anymore, but her silence was worse, heavy with expectation. Jason wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap, but he knew better. Touching her now would be like touching a live wire. Dangerous, unpredictable. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally, his voice low, steady, the closest he'd come to an apology. Britt's laugh was bitter, cutting. "That's the problem, Jason. You never want to hurt anyone, but you do. Every time." She turned away, her shoulders stiff, and Jason felt the distance between them widen, a chasm he wasn't sure he could cross. He'd faced gunfire, explosions, death itself, but this, facing Britt, facing the truth of what he'd done to her, was harder. He didn't know how to fix it, didn't even know if fixing it was possible. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away, not this time. Britt deserved better than that, even if she didn't believe it. Michael, still in his office, picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. He needed an ally, someone outside the web of deceit that had ensnared him. The voice on the other end was cautious but willing, and Michael felt a spark of hope. He laid out the situation in clipped, precise terms, leaving out the emotion, focusing on the facts. The contracts, the missing funds, the betrayal. His ally listened, asked sharp questions, and promised to dig deeper. Michael hung up, feeling a little less alone but no less cornered. The manipulator was still out there, pulling strings, and Michael knew they wouldn't stop until ELQ was in ruins or he was. He opened his laptop, pulling up every document, every email, searching for the thread that would unravel the scheme. Hours passed, the city outside his window growing darker, but Michael didn't notice. He was in too deep, chasing a truth that might destroy him before he could expose it. Molly, her letter now sealed and ready to be delivered, stood at her office window, watching the lights of Port Charles flicker like stars against the night. She thought of her mother, Alexis, and the lessons she taught her about integrity, about doing what was right even when it hurt. This apology would cost her reputation, her career, maybe even her safety in a town where grudges were held like heirlooms. But Molly couldn't live with the alternative. She'd seen what happened to people who buried their mistakes, who let guilt fester until it consumed them. She wouldn't be one of them. The letter would go out tomorrow, and with it, the truth. She didn't know what would happen next. Retribution, forgiveness, or something in between, but she was ready. Or at least, she told herself she was. In the alley, Drew started walking, his steps purposeful despite the ache in his jaw. He didn't know where he was going, not exactly, but he knew he couldn't stay still. Port Charles was a battlefield, and he'd just been reminded of the rules. Trust no one, question everything, and always watch your back. The punch was a wake-up call, a reminder that even allies could turn into enemies. As he emerged onto the street, the city lights casting long shadows, Drew felt a surge of determination. Whoever had hit him had made a mistake. They'd shown their hand, and now he knew the game was on. Jason, still in Britt's apartment, took a step toward her, then stopped. She hadn't turned back to face him, but he could see the tension in her posture, the way her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm here